Welcome to my oil tint painting class. Hello everyone. Today we're painting greens. We have a gorgeous composition, photographer taken not far from where I live and go for all the walks. Got a little gap through the hedge. Got some trees, we've got a hedgy background, got a bit of so we've got quite high up hill and some woods at the back. Very mysterious, quite exciting painting for us today. Now there are loads and loads of details on the photograph. Now you could be painting like Pre-Raphaelites and focus on every single leaf and the grass and every element on the tree and lights and spinning forever. Or we can start looking for shapes, spotting shapes and line, and focus on key areas of color as our helpers for composition building. Okay, so let's start with building up the whole kind of layout and then focus on those elements. Shape, line, and color. Okay, now on my palette, so I'm using today orange background. It will work beautifully with our greens. We can have some transparent layers. If you picked up a different color background, you might need to have more yellows and oranges with your greens to keep it more sunny and happy and lit up with that sunshine. Okay, right, so on my palette I have some white, Naples yellow, cadmium yellow, ochre. I have magenta or anything pink. Cadmium red is good as well, but I think magenta just got a little bit of extra pink in it. Violet, couple of greens. Got a warmer green and I've got a cooler green. So warmer green is my olive green, has very yellowish, if I'll soften it here, yellowish green like effect. Okay, so it's very bright and cheerful green for me. And cool green is an emerald green. Okay, and I have cerulean or cobalt blue, and we have ultramarine. So in a way, each of my color already has warm and cool elements to it. Yeah, so yellows, if I ignore the Naples yellow, I've got much more sunnier red yellow, and I've got a bit more towards violet type of kind of almost neutralized ochre. Got more red purple, I've got more blue purple, yeah, I've got more yellowy green. So we've got two elements to each color in a way. I've got more cooler green, a bit more to the green. Right, so let's work now into our drawing. I'm going to use some tips and a round synthetic brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit of violet. I'm going to make it quite runny so I can sketch with it. And I'm going to find this semi-oval shape for the opening of my hedge first. So let's roughly find how big this kind of window is going to be. Maybe an egg shape or something like that. And I can compare it. Maybe I just drop it a little bit lower. And then I'll have a little bit more space for the branches at the top. Okay. Something like that. That will give us a nice idea of the focal point. Okay. Within that shape, we can break down couple of separate shapes within that opening, within that window. We can see where the flat field is, and so it's almost our line of horizon, and some trees and the sky above. So the lower part is much smaller. Okay, and we can carry it further because it's continues further there. And we have a group of trees on one side, a woodland which is going perspective, so it's a bit smaller towards the center, and the trees are getting taller. Might just put them that way. So now that's my trees. Okay. And then I can work into my 2 trees. I might just continue this hedge line. It's maybe just a little bit more gently. That might just help me with some of the grasses. I think it's perhaps an old wall overgrown. So that's almost like continual line from our window. Now using tubes for sketching with paint allows the paint to not to slide as much afterwards. Right, I'm going to look for some of the key shapes for the tree on the right-hand side. I've got a larger tree trunk and a few quirky, narrower branches. So this big tree trunk comes out from somewhere here. Quite high up. There's quite a lot of shadow in this area as well. So perhaps even finding the gaps of light. Okay, if that is going to be part of my branch. Okay, and this is going to be the width of the larger shape of the tree trunk. Okay. Let's have a look at the shape here. I think maybe this tree will expand a bit more heavy here. Quite like that darkness. I think that's what gives that space for that window. So if it's become slightly, I think it probably will become a bit wider with a little extra leaves in here. But the tree trunk, if I'll keep it a little bit smaller. Okay. Now, good to have some idea of the branches, although we will be painting the sky and other leaves, and we will cover them. But it does give us an opportunity to practice and find solutions where they're going to be. Will they work in this part of the painting? Would they need to change the direction? Would they need to be lighter? Would they be too strong if we were to apply them too wide, kind of make them too wide? A few quite silly curling lines. So I'm slowly removing my compositional, that window outlines, and I'm bringing now the actual branches, which are my key shapes. So here I'll have some darkness in the corner. Okay, and we'll work with some perhaps shapes of leaves. But for now, let's keep it as it is. Okay. Not in all areas it's clear the exact shapes of the branches, so suggestive ways, and perhaps more looking at darknesses or what's kind of almost embraces this little opening. So we're not going to have too many parallel lines, so these lines could have been quite similar, these lines could have been quite similar, so just gently changing the angles for them. And again, it's more noticing and bearing in mind for later, because that's not going to, okay, don't like this fork. It's when we've come to the final piece and we've done already the sky and we already have done other areas. We're almost making a mental note. We're sketching it, but it's more mental notes. Okay, and let's have a look at the tree on the left-hand side. That's a little bit easier. But instead of starting from tree trunks, I'd love us to still find a couple of green branches and almost place them as shapes of cauliflowers heads, almost like there is one. There's another one. They're more hidden in the shadows, but if we find that foliage shapes first, we've got, okay, almost this little umbrellas of green. Okay. I can see that wall, part of that hedge and shadows. The ivy been crawling over and creeping up. So it allows me to see some of the shadows, almost some of the brambles, kind of create this whole edge. Yes, it's a steeper end. And then I'll put a few tree trunks just to see the direction. Can't see the exact, they're semi-straight, but it's a group of trees, or it's a family of those trees here. Don't spend too much time on them, they're just somewhere there. What we'll need is the branch leaning out. It's not quite the shape of our, well, I suppose it is quite close to the shape of our opening. Maybe my opening needs to be a tiny bit bigger. There are some darker tones on the kind of the leaves of these branches. That's kind of what defines the shape of the window here. Okay. Group, another group. And I also love the pole from the fields, maybe the old fence. leaning towards the right. Just somewhere here, just again, if I find it earlier on, because that might give me an opportunity. Do I want to move it a little bit more towards the center? Do I want to make it slightly smaller? It's that opportunity to make your decisions earlier on, or give yourself an opportunity to compare it with the shapes afterward. Lovely. So that tree looks much more detailed, but loads of it will be painted with the sky. But this is very simple, just directions and just analyzing shapes. And then we're ready to start analyzing them with color. Right, now let's get going with our color. I'm going to work with clouds in the sky first to find the lightest tones at the back. And then we'll start working into the lighter greens. Again, we're going to focus on that window between branches. So let's get some oil on our brush. Let's have some white. Okay. So we're going to start looking for the lighter shapes for the clouds in the sky. So let's start with a slightly darker version of the sky. I'm going to go for some ultramarine with my white. I think I've got quite a bit of oil on my brush, so I'll just take some of it off. And I want to make it slightly cooler, slightly grayer. If I use a dab of ochre, no, maybe not a good idea. A dab of ochre and a dab of violet. Just don't want it to be purple, but if I were to use a dab of ochre, it kind of makes it a little bit more grayish blue. So ultramarine on its own might be a little bit too bold, but to cool it off, I made myself a grayish color by adding a dab of ochre and a dab of violet. Okay, so higher kind of middle ground of the sky, we have slightly darker clouds. Perhaps it's a nice stormy clouds coming up. Close to the horizon, got loads of bold whites or just off whites, very the lightest tones. And then close to the top of the photograph here, we still have some lighter tones. And the reason for it, we have a very heavy, deep shadow. And this is just a little bit of light. So it's an overcast day with probably a stormy sky. So middle section of the sky here is going to have the darkest tones. Now I'm going around the branches, but to be honest, if I were to paint over them, that's fine as well, or shrinking them so they're not going to stay, first of all, so wide, and secondly, you've got more space, more dark, more kind of space to work with. Right, so again, if I were to top it up with a dab of blue and a dab of violet, sorry, a dab of ochre and a dab of violet for my blue, just to have some of that extra darkness. Okay, and I'm going to follow it through, perhaps on the left, maybe still a little bit higher. So I'm looking for shapes. Branches I can make much more narrower. I can always make them wider. But while I'm painting the sky, if I can make them slightly, kind of work with the background color. Okay, and behind the trees on the left-hand side, we can hardly see sky. We can see loads of light, but that light on its own, if we just leave a light tone, quite a pale one. Sorry, I picked up a lot of violet here by accident. we have a lot of light tones because the trees are so dark. But if we just painted whitish, that's going to be too strong light contrast. Okay, I've gone way too dark, so let's get some more white. A little bit more fresh blue, so I have a lot of grays there. Another option you could have done, just used ultramarine and a dab of black. Okay, I have a little bigger opening between the tree trunks somewhere here. I'm going to paint it a bit more confidently in a larger space. So I can shrink it with tree trunks or smaller branches or leaves later, but I want to look out for that pattern of light overall. Somewhere here. So I'm squinting my eyes to see overall shapes. So if I just do little dabs, it will help me doing little dabs. And I probably will end up with little dabs, but then I might lose a structure. So this is a gap between a tree trunk. So all of that area is going to be somewhere here. So those little shapes of light are somewhere here. But bigger shapes is easier to identify because that's that direction. Something here as well. Okay. Also, kind of cauliflower shapes of the foliage here on the trees allows us to say, right, so these areas going to stay more solid dark. So the light will be above it or below it, but might not be in the middle of those areas. Okay. Now if I'll go slightly lighter, so I'll use a bit of white and I'll use a so that's kind of a bluey gray tone. Okay. Blue and gray. And I use a slight dab of ochre into that. So it's a warmer gray now. Very, very small change. But I think that will be a good color for that medium darkness of the sky. That's more of a lighter version. Again, harder to see it at the moment because the orange is very strong and powerful and overwhelms our eyes. Okay, but it is a lighter version. Okay, maybe to show that lighter version, I'm just tweaking where some of this light is coming, perhaps below the tree, to show that is the difference between kind of the gray above the branches and the gray below the branches. But if I put those two grays together, that is the difference. And a bit of distance between them, and it's harder to see that variety. Okay. And I'm going to use a similar gray, perhaps, just to top it up on my darker gray we've done earlier here. So it will show that space, because I'll have some much bolder lighter tones below. So I want to see that change much more softer. elsewhere. Okay. And I'm going to go to the lightest tone of the clouds. So again, I'll use some fresh white and some Naples yellow. But a lot of white will come with that. So it's, again, bluey gray, but Naples yellow. It's not going to make it green, even we've still got consistent, quite a bit of blue going there. But it makes it even lighter. It looks dark on the palette, but on my painting, it will appear almost bold, fresh white. At the late stages, if we need to, we can add more fresh white, but perhaps we might not need it, or definitely not at the early stages, as we haven't built up any other shapes of medium tones, so everything is a little too strong and light at the moment. So advantage of painting on an orange background today is that painting with violet gives us some fantastic shapes, sorry, colors and shapes as well, against the orange. Those beautiful colors just happen naturally. Working transparent, it's quite good. It kind of preserves the initial color. Might put a tiny bit more extra of this light higher up, as there might be just a little extra sparkle of white cloud or a whisper of light coming in. Again, it probably will be lost and our greens. Okay. I realized I've missed one corner for the sky, darker sky here, so let's touch that one up. The strokes are very soft. They're very easy to blend with the previous ones. Now this blob of white cloud will look even more stronger and kind of almost we're on top of the hill, and it's almost like surrounds, almost like creeps up over the hill. So if I put a little bit of darkness on the side of it and blend with that shape, might just give me a little bit of extra instead of a flat shape of that cloud, because it will be a lot of empty white space otherwise. Just a little bit there. And I think that will allow me to put a bit of fresh white on the top here as well. Just a gentle. Again, I'm not sure if it shows enough on the camera. That should be enough for now. Okay. I'll come in above here as well. Okay. Right. We'll touch it up if we need to once most of the greens are done. So let's stop at that. Now we've done the lightest tones. Let's pick up some medium tones. And I'm interested in some of these exciting lighter greens inside of our window, our little gap in the hedge, and perhaps the little light tones of the leaves, which are lit up from the inside out towards us. Okay, we'll then work into the shadows. So in a way, we're prepping all the bold and sunny grasses and leaves, so then we can frame it all with that lovely darkness. So I'm still using my medium-sized filbert brush. I'm going to load it with a little bit of white and olive green. My olive green is quite a yellowish green. So if yours hasn't got that yellowish feel, just add extra cadmium yellow. Okay. And I'd love us to mix a number of greens of a similar darkness, or of a very close darkness. And as we will be mixing them, we'll just place them on our painting. So this olive green could go as a color for our field. So on the painting, it looks very yellowish, but it is actually just that olive green. Might go a tiny bit more darker, so it's okay. And because we'll be painting it prior to the shadows, we can make these colors go a little bit further into our hedge, further into the shadows. So using darker colors will shrink their volume on the borders. So okay, so that will be my oh, this area. There are some extra shadows in there, but let's just start with one color at a time. Now, next one, I'm going to use emerald green and ochre. Now, I need to have enough ochre mixed so it looks like a darker version of my olive green, but it will look slightly different. Got that much more solid color to the green, less yellowy. Okay, and that will be my probably subtone. Some little shadows, subtones to some of my grasses here. So altogether it appears as a shape, but we can subdivide colors within it. And I can see some of that grass and color catches somewhere here. Maybe some leaves, but again, just might give me an idea. Might paint some of it over later. There will be much more shadow, so there will be just a hint of it left. But we tend to put a little bit extra. So that was ochre and emerald green. And now I'm going to add a little bit magenta to this paint mixture. So magenta, emerald green, and ochre will give you much more brown, much more darker brown color. Now brown is kind of, it's a browny green, yeah. Again, if you end up with a very dark color, just add a hint of white with that. Maybe bring a little bit more ochre back, which will lighten things up. So they're very close, but they are different. They're close in darkness, but they're very different in color. Of course, we can say that this is the lightest, this is a bit more medium, this is much more darker tone, but overall, in comparison to even this dark or in comparison to these lights, they are more in medium tones. I'll touch up my earlier lighter green, might smudge into a lighter edge of the tree here. I quite like that browny color, browny orange. Okay. And there is another color. If I were to mix with any of my greens on my palette here, a little bit of ultramarine. That will give me much more settled type of darkness for the green. Okay, that's probably as dark as I want to go, but there is a nice shadow on the trees and the distant. Some of that, and maybe even darker right in the base. Again, I'm trying to make it much more settled, softer. Don't want to make it too jumpy, dark, because it will be more distant areas. So if you want any of that similar light, perhaps come in between branches of the trees, tree trunks, because that will be later on appearing much lighter green. Okay. And maybe a little similar color, ultramarine, sorry, yes, ultramarine blue with a dab of olive green, so it's like a darker version of the color. For the trees, it's actually a young pine woodland, so the trees are a little bit cooler. There is a bit of warmth as well because they're new needles, they're new, so more of a spring walk. So I'm trying to make varieties of edges for my trees so they're not too similar. So I'm twisting, turning my brush to create that variety. If some of the orange is present, still kind of left at the base or halfway through or partially, again, that's a nice, beautiful link of the colors within the painting. Just use tiny little bit more ultramarine and my palette greens to show some darkness next to the horizon, gently, just to have that less smudged effect. And if I want a little bit more light back, I can use some fresh white, dab of cadmium yellow at any point if you want some extra light on white, cadmium yellow, any of your palette green. we can have a little bit of extra light here. Again, might just bring that sunshine suddenly, or more sharper shadows. So some lovely softness. There's also some sharper shadows there as well. A bit more of that light for me. Okay. Got a bit too busy. I think thicker paint allowed me to make some extra strokes, which are taking a little bit too much attention. I'm going to be back to my magenta and green color, just a little bit back, so I haven't lost that color totally. Okay, if you're happy with your trees, that's great. If you need something, feels like something needs to be done, fair enough, go and intervene and work with it. But if you're happy, but you see now I'm doing something extra, stop. If you've got that variety, that's fabulous. Okay, that's better. Right, and then I need some light on the higher branches. And let's again use some magenta and olive green. A little bit of light. I think I'm losing some light here. So ochre, magenta. Did I use emerald green? Emerald green. So I'm looking for that orangey green altogether, browny green, but pleasant browny green, not dull. It's more into the orange, it's more into that magenta. I'm just going to place few colors just to see what they appear as, just individual small dabs, because that's where we'll see there's some light, but there's no particular defined shape. We can see it is almost a little halo in this area, yeah? So, and again, if we start thinking of a shape, it's easier for us to understand where we're placing them. If we think of very individual strokes, then it's much harder to deal with them. Okay, so I can put a little bit of I want some more magenta into this. When you will be going over the sky, some of the strokes will go over the sky strokes. You'll be lifting loads of new extra light. So just be careful so your greens are not going to become whitish greens. Just keep them quite orangey, quite yellowy. So all you need to do is just to keep coming back to your palette and keep bringing some fresh strokes. Now the leaves can go over your tree trunks. They don't have to be just in the gaps. Right, let's find this space a little bit better. Well, magenta, some ochre, and some olive green. I'll do a tiny bit more. And then I will need the support of the shadows to know if I'm succeeding at this stage or not. I think it's going to go a little lower. Okay. And I can see similar color. So if I'll stop at the top and I'll just increase the volume of magenta in with my green, so it becomes much more red, much more purpley, much more browny, but very transparent, beautiful brown. I can see a bit of that color if I'll go reasonably diluted with it on some of the dry undergrowth here. Okay, I might actually try just magenta on its own. Let's see how that will work against the pink. Oh, that's quite nice. Sorry, against the orange background. It is quite I quite like it a lot because I can work with that color afterwards. I can work with the introduction of thicker layers. Right, on the base of this tree, I'm going to use, it's not overly fresh magenta, but it's as clean as I can get it because my brush still has a lot of green, but it's very diluted. And I'm going to paint over this one. So when the dark tones will come in here, when the light tones will come in, that red, that more intensive orange and red will support it quite nicely. It's a bit of that similar color. So it reminds me a little bit of my early sketch lines of purple, but maybe they're not as dark, they're a little bit softer. They're not as bold in tone. Okay. Right, now we're going to start looking at our shadows. My plan is to go for the darker stones, some of the tree trunks, some of the darker shadows and tree trunks on the left-hand side, and then pick up some of the darker greens, okay? Meaning the big shapes of the leaves here on the left-hand side. So I'm going to start with slightly smaller brush, but I want to load it with more stronger violet. Again, the violet still will go on top. If I'll just test it out, if it goes on top of my current transparent layers, it will still stay soft and a little bit more runny. So I'm not adding any white or any other colors. I want to play with this orange. I do like it quite a lot. So transparent amount of stronger violet. See how it will settle. And also it will create you textures of the tree bark. I'm not going to paint it all. I'm going to touch it up here and there. If my violet will start touching the white sky or the light sky, it will start appearing more fresh violet. In that case, we might need to come back and perhaps a little calm it down. Sometimes it might be a little too fluorescent. Okay, but these darker branches will come up quite beautifully here. Also, because there is ivy on this tree, there are loads of other shapes, there are loads of maybe some brambles, so don't be scared of dragging some lines across using the same color. A little bit more straight. And if we're dragging a little bit of green or dragging a little bit of violet or just smudging some of the pale blue, it becomes part of our painting as well. So just a little bit at a time while we're working with our violet here. Just a little bit at a time. So the tree becomes darker, but it's not just solid. Excuse me. And for the branches, again, don't have to follow the whole branch, but almost find the chunks which are a little bit heavier, which are a little bit more deeper in color, and then just almost charge that violet, meaning kind of bring it a bit more concentrated in those gaps and those parts. Okay. Now, if it becomes too violety for you, maybe perhaps you've gone off your non-white surfaces. So then maybe pick up a little bit of ochre with the violet so it doesn't stay too purple. But violet on top of the orange background will give you that impression immediately. So still diluted violet, a little bit more concentrated, a little bit more Renier. I'm just varying it. I don't want white on my branches. So if it stays, I need to bear it in mind that maybe something else will come in, maybe with a bit of ochre. If not immediately, maybe later, or a little bit of red. That, okay. I want this branch to be over. Okay, this is a bit smudged, but let's make it to a branch. Right, and let's have a look for this diluted dark violet elsewhere. Perhaps some shadows, a bit more bold and strong. Now, at the top of this hedge, we'll have slightly darker areas. So if I'll go with my diluted violet, there's a bit of already soft paint here of green and that magenta. So I'm almost picking up a little bit of extra color. Okay. Maybe where that pole I wanted. Okay, maybe it's on its own at the moment. Mhm. I'm interested in painting the pole over quite thick layers of green. I ended up with some green on my brush, mixing it with violet, beautiful green. I've just got a couple of strokes of them here. So something I might come back to. Okay, and let's get some of them tree trunks here as well. They're less transparent. We've got quite a lot of sublime, a bit of light, a bit of shadows on the right-hand side tree. The trees on the left has more shadows. However, if I start them in a similar way, I can always make them more solid. But I want to see maybe that connection initially. You will have much more white around this area, so be extra careful not turning your trees to be pure violet looking tree trunks. If that's going to start happening, just add a bit of extra red, a bit of ochre. Okay, so let's find some of these shadows. It's a little abrupt. Okay, anything else a little bit wider? See, I don't want to carry on doing the trees from top to bottom. I'm trying to find more individual shapes, maybe how they're going to be lost and found within those jungle of greens. Again, if I'm picking up too much white, I can mix my violet with ochre and red, crimson, sorry, magenta. Some of my tree trunks are looking a bit too similar in widths here. So I'll just work into that variety perhaps as well. Okay, it's coming on. If there was a little bit of stronger darkness somewhere, almost like the root area of this tree. Kind of some of this extra depth. Yeah, simplify this grass. I over smudged it here, I think. But I know I could put some extra paler colors on top there. Get some extra, maybe exciting light in the last moment. Okay. And now back to slightly larger brush. And let's look at some of the darker greens and fill most of the remaining orange. Now I'm going to use some cadmium yellow, dab of white, so it's not going to be too transparent, and ultramarine. Now, it's a lot of yellow for the green, but I'm going to leave it aside. I mainly need the darker ultramarine to be to turn to green. So I don't need a lot of yellow, because if I just use emerald green, that will be too fluorescent, but that will be a much better, and it's a lighter version of my shadow greens. So if I were to put it into these cauliflower shapes, those blocks of branches of solid leaves. Okay, so we're seeing them as simplified shapes, and we can split them into more exciting forms afterwards and mingle them a bit more with light afterwards. But if we start with them, so they need to look much darker than most of them, except the tree trunks, most of the greens further back, but they're not the darkest ones. There will be some more darker tones. So let's just fill those areas for now. So a little more cadmium yellow. There was a tiny bit of white in it as well. And ultramarine mainly. Close here to the bottom, the shapes are a little bit more simplified. Not simplified, a little bit more broken down into sub shapes. So because there is loads of beautiful quality of roots and the growth, other plants, so I might be just a little bit less abrupt with my shapes. So look for more individual groups of leaves, which will remain kind of sub-cauliflowery in shapes, but we stop seeing them as a wider branch. Okay, this nice light I had before just all smudged and I've lost what I wanted there, so I'm going to bring it back afterwards. That's a better shadow altogether. Shadow of greens. And let's do a little bit of similar approach to mid areas somewhere here. Just watch out again if you're picking up by accident some white. Just smudge it back so the leaves will appear more darker. Not just smudged with white. Okay, how much of these leaves are going to come in here? I'll pepper them a little here because I do want some of the extra darker green to be present here as well. But what we can do, we can offset our medium green from the tree on the right hand side. So if I build up a silhouette for it by painting around my current shapes, so I'm just covering my orange background. Lots of darker things happening here. So the volume of sky will be shrinking. There might be an occasional blue coming through. And also some of this will go. Right, if your green starts looking more like an emerald green, so it has more blue in it, just add again tiny bit of yellow or some ochre to it, so it's back to a little warmer green. Okay, and next green, I'm gonna add my violet with green, violet with emerald green. That's with a very dark color. If I use it in small quantities, I'll make my final decision if I need to put a bit of ochre in it or if it just remains quite dark. So I want to find some shadows, a little bit of darkness under my greens of the cauliflower shapes. So this green will be mixing with our previous greens, and that's why it's not going to look so solid. That's why I didn't want to put any white in it. I didn't really start it with Edinoka. And as I'm placing my strokes and lifting lighter colors from underneath layers, I need to keep topping up my fresh color from the palette, kind of mixing it again so that white is not overwhelming. And put some of the darkness right on the edge with the light of the field here. And if you wanted to create a little bit of grassy shapes by stretching that darkness over, it will kind of create a little light there as well. Well, it will smudge with lighter colors, that's why it will create a bit of light. Okay. I'm not sure about outlines of these shapes. I like the darknesses, but they're just a little realistic looking. And I want some more darkness in this area. Again, perhaps stronger, fresher violet, fresher emerald green. Some of my strokes might, from this color combination, might look more into violet, some more into the green, some staying a little bit more neutral, kind of semi-blue shade of that color combination, but it will be a most likely being the darkest tone we can mix today. Just mingling some of these shapes with the green, with some of the light, with some of the earlier tree trunks. Making them a little bit more solid in places. Okay. And some of the darkness at the top. which will bring it lower, which will bring it a little bit more grounded. I'm planning to bring a little bit of lighter tone to some of these super dark areas, just to get a bit more definition, but this is our build up. Now, if I were to look now here in the center area of these complex greens, I need to think about lighter tone overall, something darker almost behind it. So when I'll be doing some of these new strokes, I already have a little bit of the darker greens, but they're not as strong. So they just need to support, and new darker strokes need to support the previous greens. They're too smudgy. I need more paint. Maybe I'll get back to the earlier color of ultramarine and yellow. Yeah, I just need a little bit more paint here. This needs more yellow, as it has a lot of white in this area. If I go with extra yellow, it compensates it, kind of balances it a little. Sometimes it's good to take time to practice some of the strokes for the leaves. In some places I deliberately go of quite big and big shapes and big strokes, just to look out for overall shapes rather than individual leaves. And in some of the silhouettes, I start dabbing a bit more as if I'm following a branch or working into kind of the pattern of the more beautiful pattern of the individual leaves. Okay, so that's getting there. So more transparent tree with leaves, not as busy, getting a little bit more busy, and it's more solid. So this is the area where I just need to get rid of some of extra gaps. I might put a couple of greener shapes here as well. To balance some of that space, that's okay. Right in this area. I think I'll see better if I were to place a little lighter green. So if I'll go for cadmium yellow again, perhaps a dab of white and some ultramarine. And that will be my lighter green. I just want to have and come back to some of the highlights of these cauliflower shapes, branches, groups. That's better. But just touching them up with a little bit of light, kind of bottom parts of them, just finding a couple of individual lighter leaves. I think that just connects it together. It doesn't look as separate shapes. That's exciting now. Oh, the shape. So the highlights on these leaves are more the bottom of the individual shapes. So having them a little bit brighter. Try to keep mixing your colors so you don't have too much stripy effects. A little bit of it is good, but not too much. Otherwise, everything becomes too stripy. Maybe a couple of here as well. So it's something to combine with sharpness, softness. Maybe keeping the shadow a bit more softer. Maybe a little bit of light again, gently here. Okay. Maybe a little bit more softness again somewhere here for the foreground. So we're staying more within a tree. Maybe some of those grasses will come in. While I'm on that color. Okay. Still do with a little bit of similar light, perhaps some here. A bit tiny bit lighter. So any of the yellows, cadmium yellow, Naples yellow with our green. So just dab into your palette, see what works. If you place a color against some of your shapes and they are not working there, that's fine as well. Okay, so now I need to sort this area. Much happier with that low area. Even put a little more light here. Okay. Right, so again, perhaps a little bit of paler around behind. I think there's some more stronger, lighter tone will work better as well there. I often squint my eyes and look for the shapes together. Okay, that looks much calmer. And let's touch up some darks again. Well, I've got this darker green. I might just touch up a little bit of this red corner, just a little extra green, more mingled with some of the browns here. Some of it I want to cover my reds and violets. Some of it will be quite nice to have left. It's almost like the ivy in a shadow. Something gentle. Maybe a little sprinkle of light with Naples yellow. Okay, that's not enough. Then cadmium yellow and white. Maybe a little sprinkle of highlights. It's almost like that uneven surface of the ivy creeping up the tree. A bit more extra light. So I picked up a lighter green and it took me elsewhere. Okay. Magenta. I need a cleaner color for that. Okay, so at least it's giving me an idea what I could do with some of these highlights. I'll just take some chunks of paint and come back to those areas. After my shadow, I want to finish my shadow of my trees on the top left corner. So violet is back on my brush, emerald green is next to it, mixed. I want to see it more into the green, quite runnish. And it will be mixing with the thicker layers we already have here. So I'm going to be looking now for patterns, almost like the shapes of the cauliflowers, but I'm looking for the patterns underneath of them. Okay, so let's find those shadows. Okay, perhaps maybe looking more, not the same direction, but a similar direction. Maybe some of the gaps between the greens will be a little bit more pleasant. So it doesn't have to be a lot. And it's okay to smudge it with that present paint. So then you have much better understanding of it. Well, it reads it's a bit better for our eyes. If it's too sharp, I can soften it. And a little bit of small quantities. It's a little bit more darker, I can sharpen it. That's quite nice. I ended up with a few smaller strokes, which take in that attention as well. Quite nicely. Okay. And see if I could do with another stroke of dark somewhere here. Okay, maybe perhaps stop at the greens there. I'm quite happy with that. Any of this green violet anywhere at the front, so kind of to reinforce that shadow of darkness on maybe this left hand, so right hand side. maybe a bit more on the border, some extra shadows, back to more violet than green. So I'm not painting anything individual. I'm kind of looking for a bit of light, a bit of dark, a little bit of how those shapes will connect. Yeah. So I'm not, and if the texture will end up being representing a bit of grasses there, that's fantastic. But I'm mainly looking for those extra darknesses of my opening. Okay, this red is a bit too orange, a bit too strong still. That's much more calmer, that's good. And then I spotted a little bit of some of the orangey spaces earlier on. Okay, if I'll work with the dark here first. Okay. Right, so a little touch of the oranges and lights. I'll need a smaller brush. So I'll have some white and clean or cleaner yellow. Okay, some stronger yellow. And I'm gonna get some magenta. Right, I think I need more pigment, otherwise it's not gonna glow. So let's have a bit more stronger. I've run out of my yellow and magenta. Now I only need a small amount. In the area, especially where I want to put a little highlights. I'll start with the lighter color now. I'll put a stronger color. It's almost like in preparation of. So, for example, looks like there is a bit of patch of light, which I'll cool off in a moment. Again, I'm just prepping it for maybe slightly darker. It is very light. So stronger magenta, stronger yellow. It's better. Match these areas gently. Just want that playfulness of the light coming in gently into the hedge. There is a gaps of light. There is some that variety of plants. Just want to have that little dry debris. Some variety. Shows more bolder, lighter tones. Some of that variety of grasses shows much more paler. Again, it just gives them an opportunity to show that's the root of the tree, or is it the whole hedge? full of greens, or at labyrinths of lost and found shapes. So just play with your brush. Probably wouldn't be wise to copy here. Just small look for the way I touch things, the way my brush works. Okay, that's what I'm saying. My grasses as well. Simplify this. Getting too busy. I don't like something, I can smudge it back. That more violet. Just to bring a couple of strokes back. Sometimes we over detail shapes. So I'll just come back to some of this. That's better. Happy dots, where we just bring a little bit of shapes. They're almost helping us out to be more natural by bringing some full stops here and there. Okay, I like this one, but I don't like it in too. Okay, that's better, like a stone. This one over smudged, so let's have it more solid. More simplified. Shapes a little more connected. So those are little nuances. Right, and I need tiny bit of light on my grasses. So I'm going to be back to white, yellow, and emerald green. White, yellow, very small emerald green, or even I think emerald green will be stronger than if I use olive green. Okay, quite a lot of green, more yellow, and more white. Around yellow, Naples yellow. I wanted cadmium yellow, but I think that might come handy as well. Last few touches, just to brighten up the distant silhouette of our what we were focusing on, that beautiful landscape behind. So let's just brighten it up. Let's just make it a little bit more on fire with light, yeah, sprinkling, kind of sparkling with that light. So I'm gonna use lighter tone. That's nice. On the camera, it looks very whitish, but just quite a beautiful yellowy green. So little dabs disappeared, Perhaps a little dab of light. Okay, maybe a little bit too strong in yellow, but I think that might be quite a nice touch. If it's too much, just use your finger on the brush just to kind of persuade how far those strokes gonna go, so I can touch it with my bigger brush and just have these volumes of the light just a little bit shrunk. I want them to be there, but I want them to be a little bit smaller. That's better. And these ones just slightly touched up. A more orangey yellow green rather than yellowish green, because it stands out almost like a white one against this environment. So let's work with our environment. A little bit of light here. Just careful with too abrupt strokes, so maybe smudge them with the tip of the brush, maybe. Use the back of the brush just to break that perfection. And I think I'll probably put a couple of lighter strokes, almost as if the light is just touching maybe somewhere in this area. If you like that area, you don't want to add anything else, that's totally fine as well. So go with what works for your piece. It looks too similar, so let's break it down here. I quite like some of these strokes, but they're perhaps a little too light. So they just start to appear a bit out of place. Contrast might be too deep. Right, I'm not too sure about it now, so I'm going to simplify it all. Okay, giving it a try. Know what I want, but it didn't happen, so simplified. Go back to the shadows. One option is persevere while you're still working. Another one, stop and get back to it after a break, and after you had a little play, kind of look back and make your final decisions after that. Otherwise, things could go out of hand sometimes. Right, I'm going to stop at that. Could have been a tiny bit more of a shadow close to my pole here. Again, stepping away, looking at that little fence pole. That's better, so it's not on its own as much. It's got a little bit of a support of darker color. But most importantly, it's surrounded by light. Quite happy with the sky there. I'm quite happy with a lot of calmness and transparency of the branches. Perhaps a little bit of play work here, and I might still touch up a little bit of play work on the foreground. But yes, our window is created by following the shapes, following the color as our key components for composition. So thank you very much for today, and I look forward to seeing your work finished or in progress. Until next week.